My son passed away just a month after he was born. I'll spare myself the sorrow of explaining how it happened, but I'll never forget the tears of my wife. Grief is ugly, so utterly ugly. When we lost him, it felt as though my wife was giving up pieces of her soul. Her wails were so intense, they could have shattered glass, made the blood in my veins curdle. Her sobs would turn into screams at the universe, at the twisted higher power that allowed this, at herself, at me. She screamed until her throat was raw, as if the sound could bring him back. I'll be honest, I didn't cry. I can't even remember shedding a tear. But it wasn't because I wasn't heartbroken. I didn't cry because it felt like she was already crying for the both of us. There's no pain more shared than that of a grieving mother. I wish there had been a guide to grief, a grieving for dummies, if you will. One that could have prepared me for both the before and the after. Before, you're just waiting, like watching the last grain of sand in an hourglass, waiting for it to fall. My heart kept beating as his heart stopped. It hit me like a wave. I realized then that grief was inevitable. Before I could even feel it, I thought about how it was coming for me. And I knew, in the blink of an eye, life would become something I'd have to fight to hold on to. Maybe I was already grieving him before he left. Maybe I was preparing myself. Or maybe I just thought I was. You can never be truly ready. And then came the after. Not the moment you leave the hospital or the drive back home, but the moment you step through your front door. That suffocating emptiness. It fills your chest, your relationship, your entire home. This is it. This is my new reality. It's real. What made it even worse was that this new reality wasn't foreign. It was one I had almost a month ago. I felt guilty not grieving for him, but for all the moments we would never share. I grieved the birthdays we would never celebrate, the first steps, the graduations. I'd even take a teenage fight over this any day. I couldn't help but mourn the life he could have had instead of the one we lost. My wife, though, missed their skin-to-skin moments, the way she'd hum to him, even getting up at 3 a.m. just to comfort him when he cried. We never talked about it, but we could tell that we were grieving in different ways. We slept with our backs turned to each other, and she would flinch whenever I touched her. It was like she was allergic to me, but I understood. She needed her space. The funeral was pure hell. I'm sure rotting in the depths of hell would have been easier than attending my child's funeral. At least it would have been warm. I remember standing in front of the casket alone, staring down at him. All I could think was, caskets shouldn't be that small. He was in a box small enough to hold in my arms. When they lowered him into the ground, the cries started again. My wife screamed into the clear sky, so guttural it felt like we were losing him all over again. But she didn't collapse into my arms. She collapsed to the ground, as if she wanted to join him. And then you open the door again, and the emptiness is deeper, the reality even clearer. We packed up his nursery, his future, into boxes, and then argued about whether to throw it all out. She wanted to store it in the attic. I said I'd never go up there again if we did. So we left it all in that room, gathering dust. The door stayed closed, but not locked, just shut. I think that symbolized our grief. We closed the door on that part of our lives, but weren't ready to lock it away forever. Each day doesn't get easier. It just gets farther from the day it happened. Mornings are the worst. You wake up, your eyes creak open, and sunlight pours in through the window, and then it hits you. You're grieving, as if you could ever forget. Little things started to annoy us. One of us would forget to do the dishes, and it'd end with someone sleeping on the couch or taking a midnight drive. We tried couples therapy, but we needed so much more than that. It wasn't even about us anymore. It was about him. The wedge between us? It was him. I was lost, unsure of how to deal with it, but then I heard it. A soft hum coming from the bedroom after I came home from work. I furrowed my brows and went upstairs. The last time I heard that tune, it was in the hospital, just before the heart rate monitor had flatlined. When I opened the door, it felt like I was dreaming. There she was, lying in our bed, cradling a baby in her arms. She was gazing at it like she could see galaxies in its eyes. I pinched my thigh to make sure I was awake. The pain was real. She was so engrossed, she wouldn't have noticed me standing there forever. Honey, I called out softly. She looked up, her smile a distant memory. Oh, hi. What are you holding? Oh, this. She looked at it. It's a Reborn doll. I raised an eyebrow. They're realistic dolls for mothers. To help me cope. She nodded quickly, her smile fading. It was as if I had interrupted something important. Oh! I stared at the doll, then at her. The way she gazed at it, as if she was holding her flesh and blood instead of plastic. Has it helped? I've only had it for a few hours, but it's comforting. First, it rubbed me the wrong way, but if this was helping her, then I was glad. Do you want to hold him? I froze. I didn't know if I could hold the doll and act like it was my son. I couldn't see it like that, but I knew it wasn't just about me. So I hesitantly walked over and stretched my arms out. A chill ran down my spine as I held the cold doll. I pulled it close, cradling it, and then I broke down. Felt too damn real. I dropped to my knees, the tears flowing uncontrollably. It wasn't my son, but I missed him. I missed what we never had. She waited patiently as I cried, my head hanging low. My sobs were raw, cracking my voice. After that, I noticed things getting a little better. It didn't fill the void, but something else stood in it for a while. On days when she struggled, she would hold the doll, hum to it, even pretend to breastfeed it. It still creeped me out a bit, but I understood. It was comforting, but it wasn't him. And I think that's when the gap between us widened. One day, I came home and saw light spilling from a door upstairs. That door. It was unlocked, but I never expected us to open it, at least not yet. I swallowed hard as I walked toward it. Slowly opening the door, I saw the nursery, everything unpacked. I stepped inside, my worry growing. Then I saw the doll in the crib. I grabbed the railing and leaned in, confused. I didn't hear you come in, she said, startling me. Jesus, what is this? What is this? Well, it's our nursery. Yeah, but why is everything unboxed? Our baby needs a nursery, she said without hesitation. We stared at each other. Her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. I know these dolls help, but this? You know this isn't our Dash. This isn't our what? I froze, unsure how to continue. I'm just worried, I finally said. I unpacked everything myself, and I'll put it back when I'm ready. Okay? She said, her voice sharp. I felt 1,000 words stuck in my throat, but I just said, okay. I think I need some time alone with him, she said quietly. I nodded, looking away as I slipped past her. I wanted to be patient, I really did. But pretending this was our child was making me feel worse. That night, we didn't speak. I faced the window and she faced the baby monitor. After a while, I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up. I opened my eyes, the dim moonlight shining through the window. The room was quiet, except for the static cries coming from the baby monitor. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and stared at the monitor. Liv, wake up! I shook my wife, rousing her from her sleep. She lifted her sleep mask and looked at the monitor. My gaze shifted from her to the screen, my throat tightening as she sighed, threw her mask onto the dresser, and stood up. I'll take care of him, get some rest, she said tiredly. I stared at her, my eyes wide. as she walked out of the room. As she entered the nursery, I could hear her voice over the speaker. Shoo, shoo, it's okay. I blinked, frozen, as I listened to her hum. The crying gradually slowed to a stop. My eyes flicked toward the door as she came back in, grabbed her sleep mask and laid down again. She didn't say anything as I just continued to stare. I wanted to go into the nursery, but instead, I stayed there, my eyes growing heavy as they dried, bloodshot. Before I knew it, the sun was rising, and I had to get ready for work. I moved slowly, stiffly, getting dressed. I tried to convince myself it was all a dream, but I had already woken up from one. When I finished getting ready, I kissed her forehead as she slept and left the room. As I passed the nursery, I paused. For a moment, I thought about going in, but instead, I pressed my ear against the door. But there was nothing. Silence. I don't know what I expected to hear. I couldn't even be sure of what I had heard last night. I wasn't sure if hearing something now would make me feel more or less insane. The day at work dragged on. I kept nodding off at my desk, struggling to process what people were saying to me. Everything felt like a blur. When I got home, the first thing I wanted to ask my wife was what had happened last night. But after what had happened in the nursery, I feared she would tell me that the crying doll was normal because it was our son. When I walked in, I felt like I was going to collapse. My wife was at the sink washing dishes. She turned her head when I entered. Hey, hun. Hi. How was work? The usual. Be quiet when you go upstairs. I just put him down, and it wasn't easy, she chuckled. I'll be sure not to wake him. I cleared my throat nervously as she shot me a quick glare before looking away. At least I was trying to play along. I quietly made my way upstairs, trying to avoid making any noise. As I passed the door, my breath caught in my throat. Something about it always took the wind out of me. Dinner was so quiet, it felt like you could hear a pin drop before it even hit the ground. The only sounds were the chewing and sipping as we ate. I was thinking about taking him to a mommy and me class. I looked up, pausing mid-chew. Yeah, that sounds good, I said, forcing a smile. I couldn't tell if she was serious or if she was just talking to fill the silence. I also wish you'd spend more time with him. You avoid the nursery like the plague, she said with a weak laugh. I'll make sure to do that, I mumbled. Thank you. I could see how hard she was trying to swallow her food, barely managing to get anything down. She was really trying, but I could tell she was struggling. I felt guilty for not understanding. It was hard to accept that we were grieving in different ways, and no matter what, we couldn't help each other with that. But I was torn, wondering if we could ever bridge the gap between our grief. The thing that kept nagging at me was last night. The crying. How could the doll be crying? It hadn't seemed to surprise her either. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had set an alarm with a baby crying sound, or maybe there was a speaker in the doll to make it feel more real. It was possible, but there was one thing that made it different. The cries sounded so much like him. If you're not a parent, a baby crying might just sound like any other, but I knew those cries. I could tell them apart from 1,000 others. Maybe it was just my grief playing tricks on me. I didn't know. Later that night, after brushing my teeth, I walked toward our bedroom when I noticed my wife in the nursery. She was slowly rocking back and forth in the chair, humming softly to the doll. Hey, I finally got him to sleep, she said as she noticed me standing in the doorway. That's good. Come say good night. I hesitated for a moment before forcing myself into the room. She stood up, walked over to the crib, and gently placed the doll down. She leaned down, kissed its forehead, and then turned to me. I glanced at her, then at the doll. I could tell she expected me to do the same. Slowly, I leaned forward, my lips puckered. Just as I got closer, a foul smell hit me. I tried to ignore it, but the stench grew stronger, making me recoil. My wife shot me a horrified look as I gagged, covering my mouth. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "I am sorry, him. Not him." "Okay. He smells like a dumpster fire. Does he have built-in waste systems too?" Tears filled her eyes as I turned away, feeling guilty. My whole body was shaking. "Just admit it. This is a joke to you. You think I'm crazy, that I'm embarrassing myself. Just say it." "Liv, no. Actually, don't. Just sleep somewhere else tonight. On the couch, the damn sidewalk. I don't care." "Okay." I stormed out of the room before the tears of rage could overwhelm me. I felt like such a damn monster. Trying to prioritize both of our healing was tearing me apart. It was destroying us. I curled up on the couch and screamed into the pillow, leaving a trail of tears behind. I cried until I couldn't anymore, eventually succumbing to exhaustion. Suddenly, I was yanked from my sleep by the sound of glass shattering. My body jolted awake. I quickly sat up, my vision a blur. I threw the blanket off and scrambled to find the source of the noise. The room was pitch black, and I ran my hand along the walls, desperately searching for a light switch. Then, my eyes shot wide open as something sharp pierced the bottom of my foot. "Fuck! Damn it!" I hissed through gritted teeth as I lifted my foot. Now, I was hopping around, trying to avoid the unseen glass as I searched for a light. Eventually, I found a switch and lit up the kitchen. Looking down at my foot, I noticed a small trail of blood behind me. I lifted it up, watching as the blood slowly dripped down my skin. It was a small shard of porcelain. I bit my cheek, took a deep breath, and yanked it out. I swallowed the scream that rose in my throat as I placed the crimson-soaked shard on the kitchen counter. That's when I noticed some white powder stuck to the bottom of my foot. Limping around the kitchen, I spotted the shattered cookie jar and the open flour bags spilled across the floor. God damn it! I quickly wrapped a dish rag around my foot and began picking up the shards. The pain from the cut and the mess took over, pushing away any thoughts about how the jar even fell in the first place. But those thoughts rushed back when I noticed small flour-coated footprints leading out of the kitchen. I carefully placed the last shard in the trash, my eyes narrowing as I watched the trail. Limping over, I kneeled down, inspecting them closely. They looked like, no, it couldn't be. I told myself it wasn't possible. But who else could have feet that small? It wasn't my wife, and it certainly wasn't an animal. A sense of unease settled over me as I quickly vacuumed the trail away. The trail stretched farther than I realized, leading me from the kitchen into the living room. Eventually, I found myself standing at the base of the stairs. The footprints continued upward. I stared at them for a moment before looking up into the dark hallway. I had at least tried to rationalize the crying from the night before, but this, I couldn't make sense of it. I took a deep breath and slowly made my way upstairs. Each footprint that disappeared into the vacuum seemed to make my heart beat faster. When I reached the top, I saw the trail continued, curved around, leading to a door. That door. I stood there, my heavy, shaking breaths hitting the wood of the door. But I couldn't bring myself to open it. I just wanted to collapse and cry, feeling like I was being haunted by my own grief. I might have been standing there for minutes or hours, but it felt like an eternity before I finally stepped back and went into the bathroom. I held back tears as I checked for any remaining glass in my foot and bandaged it properly. With everything that had happened and was still happening, all I could think was, why us? Why me? I just wanted to be a husband, a father, to have a family. Why does life have to be so cruel? It's more than just not getting what you want. It's losing what you love. It's your son dying after only a month. It's not just unfair. It's downright cruel. So fucking cruel. After securing the bandage, I limped out of the bathroom, my body heavy with exhaustion. Then I stopped in front of the nursery door. My eyes squeezed shut as I suddenly heard crying from behind it. I'd never prayed in my life, not even for my son. It always felt like shouting into an empty void. But in that moment I prayed. I prayed for it to stop. I needed it to stop. But nobody was listening. Life wasn't that fair. I should have known better. I opened my eyes, tears welling up, and kept walking past the door. The crying grew fainter as I walked away, but I could still hear it. I could feel it, the cries calling for Daddy as I laid my heavy head on the couch pillow. I had hoped my wife would wake up and deal with it, but she never did. The entire night, I lay there, tears drying on my cheeks, as the crying continued relentlessly. My mind was splintering, unable to hold onto reality as the screams echoed in my head. At that point, I just wanted to die, or at least to feel numb. To have even 5 seconds where I didn't care about anything happening would have helped me sleep that night. By morning, the crying had stopped, but I couldn't remember when it had ended. "Jack?" My wife's voice came softly, her hand resting on my shoulder. I jumped, whipping my head around to look at her. "Didn't mean to scare you. It's fine. I just didn't sleep." Guilt was evident on her face. "Is everything all right? I want to apologize for last night. You've been so patient with me, and I feel like I've been asking more than you can handle." We paused, silent, our eyes shifting away from each other. "I appreciate that. I'm sorry too. I've been too harsh. We don't need to be on the same page to care about each other." She sat down beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. I kissed the top of her head, and we just sat there in the quiet. I wanted to bring up what I saw last night, but I figured it wasn't the right time. "And about the smell, you weren't wrong. I went to check on him this morning, and it hit me hard." She chuckled weakly. "Turns out he was molding on the inside, which happens, apparently. I contacted the seller, and she said it's due to poor upkeep." Suddenly, she broke down, tears spilling as she collapsed into my chest. I held her, my shirt soaked with her tears. How did I lose him twice? My heart shattered. "It's okay. It's okay. You can always get a new one." "No, I can't." I looked into her eyes with deep concern. "Olivia, can we speak honestly, just for a moment? No hard feelings." She nodded slowly. "It's a doll. You can get a new one." Even as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd pushed the wrong button. She yanked herself away from me and stormed upstairs. "You don't get it. You never did. You know what? No, that's not fucking fair. None of this is fucking fair." Before I could say another word, she was already in our bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I buried my face in my hands, taking slow, deep breaths. Everyone always says that grief brings people together, but all it's doing is tearing everything apart. My marriage, myself, my sense of what's real and what isn't. I spent another workday in a fog, barely functioning. I even got called out by my boss for lack of work ethic. When I got home, I was greeted by a distraught wife. She was still clearly upset with me, and I debated whether or not I should even ask if she was okay. "Hey hun, are you all right?" I threw him out. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you? Olivia. Surprised you didn't say, 'Thank God.' Look, I'm sorry about this morning, but I'm trying and I know you know that. But it's hard when you keep flying off the handle. Do you want to see somebody? A grief counselor. He was my grief counselor. That's why I'm getting another one. Just like you said. Right? Right. Whatever works for you." I smiled weakly. She sipped her coffee, her eyes distant. like she was staring at something that wasn't there. Just looking at her, I could tell she was barely hanging on. But I couldn't push her any further, not for her sake and not for mine. That night, she let me sleep in our bed, but we didn't say anything more than good night. I could feel her ankles against my legs. At some point, she even turned toward me in her sleep, but she didn't want to touch me. She needed space and I gave it to her. A night without the doll in the house gave me the best sleep I'd had since his death. I woke up feeling somewhat refreshed for once, but I quickly noticed the emptiness next to me. She must have gotten up early. As I left the bedroom, I furrowed my brows when I heard humming from behind the nursery door. My puzzled expression deepened as I saw my wife cradling the doll in her arms. "Good morning. I thought you had to get rid of him. Good morning." "And I did. This is the new one," she smiled. "Wow, already? So fast." "Express shipping," she shrugged, chuckling. "Sweet. I'm gonna try and put him down for his nap. Could you brew me a cup?" she asked. "Yeah, sure." I smiled before closing the door behind me. The second she couldn't see me anymore, I stood there, completely baffled. Something about this seemed off. How could she have gotten a new one that quickly? It didn't add up. She had become so attached to the first one, and the thought of her wanting to keep it, no matter the mold, didn't surprise me. What hurt the most was that she'd lie to me. After making the coffee, I set the mugs down on the table and began scrolling through the news on my phone while I waited for her to come down. "He didn't put up a fight, thank God," she sighed with relief as she walked downstairs. "That's good," I said, sipping my coffee, keeping my eyes on the screen. She sat across from me, sipping slowly while staring off into space, lost in thought. I glanced up at her every now and then, watching her tap her finger against the mug and bite her cheek. "Are you all right?" She laughed softly at the question, circling her finger around the rim of the mug. "The weather's nice today," she responded. "It is. Maybe you should spend some time outside. You could take him out for a walk." "Yeah, that sounds nice," she trailed off, her words sounding like she was in a trance. I helped her take out the baby carriage that we never used and watched uneasily as she laid the doll in it. "Hope you two have a nice time," I smiled. "We'll be back soon." We kissed quickly before she was out the door, and I could finally breathe. It was just a few hours, but it was enough time to clear my head, time to think. The past few nights, I'd experienced things that went beyond what I thought grief would be. I knew it'd be haunting, but not like this. I never believed in the supernatural. I'm a skeptical person by nature, but after the constant crying, the footprints, it didn't make sense. I'd run in circles until I figured out something that made sense, but nothing did. My wife seemed to know more than she was letting on, but I was scared that asking one more question would push her away. Couldn't lose her, too. But now, our grief wasn't just diverging down separate paths. It felt like it was going in completely opposite directions. She needed the doll to heal, and I needed it gone to heal. But I didn't know how to get rid of it without hurting her in the process. I thought about tossing it and making her believe she misplaced it, but that felt cruel. I didn't need to add any more stress to her. By the time she came back, I hadn't made any progress. I hadn't figured anything out. I was just in more pain. "Are you feeling better?" "Yeah, it was nice to get some sun. This little guy enjoyed it too. Didn't you? Didn't you?" She cooed, clearly delighted. I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable watching her treat the doll like it was our son. But it was her way of coping, and I had to respect that. To ease my mind, I told myself that I was just under a lot of stress and that my grieving mind was playing tricks on me. I figured being tormented by the doll was better than never seeing him again. That night, she lay close to me. Our legs intertwined as she fell asleep against me, her arm across my chest. I missed her warmth so much. I thought that his death had cooled her touch, but she was still so warm, so comforting. It was easy to fall asleep that night with her against me, like a child with their favorite stuffed animal. But I was foolish to forget that life isn't unfair. It's cruel. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the cries over the baby monitor again. This time, when I opened my eyes, I realized I couldn't move at all. My heart pounded as I struggled to breathe. My jaw trembled, unable to speak, as I begged for help silently. A tear slid down my face as I waited for my wife to wake up, but she didn't. I was frozen in place, unable to do anything but listen to the cries. I wanted to scream, sob, punch a wall, but I couldn't. Suddenly, the speaker cut out, and the cries stopped, replaced by a static screech. My breath shook in the quiet room as my body stayed still on the bed. I couldn't even groan to try and wake her up. Then, I heard the creak of a door opening in the hallway, and the cries began again. Not from the speaker, but from the hallway. The cries sounded distorted. They were deeper, more drawn out, and sent goosebumps from head to toe. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperate to move, as the cries got closer. Then, the bedroom door creaked open, and the deep, gurgling sobs filled the room. I glanced over at my wife, still somehow asleep. I couldn't tell if this was happening in reality or if it was just my mind breaking. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it drawing closer, its cries growing deeper. It sounded like it was gargling on its own blood. When it reached my ear, the sobs were deafening. I couldn't move, couldn't escape the suffocating, dizzying crying that made me feel like I was drowning. "Dada," it gurgled, and just like that, my entire body unlocked. A scream erupted from my throat, like a dam breaking open. I scrambled off the bed and threw myself into the corner of the room. "Jesus Christ!" my wife shouted as she finally woke up, ripping off her sleeping mask and flipping the lamp on. I wailed in terror, curled up in the corner, my body trembling. "My God! What happened?" I could barely get a word out between sobs. "Jesus!" She hopped off the bed and knelt beside me, my body flinching as she reached out to me. "What happened?" I slowly turned to her, eyes wide with horror. Instead of speaking, I stumbled to my feet and stormed out of the bedroom. "Where are you going? What happened?" "Jack." I ignored her calls as I threw open the nursery door. My eyes darted around, searching for it, then realizing it was in the crib. "Jack, what are you doing?" "I'm not doing this anymore." "Jack, can we talk about this?" She gasped in horror as I yanked the doll out of the crib. "You're right, Olivia. This isn't a doll. This is a fucking parasite, and I want it gone. Jack, please. That's our son." "No, it's fucking not." She winced as I screamed. "Stop, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face as I shook it violently in front of her. "This isn't our son." Then, in one final burst of rage, I gripped it by its throat and slammed it to the ground with all my might. In that moment, I realized two things from the death of my son. Caskets aren't supposed to be that small, and reborn dolls aren't supposed to have internal organs. My wife crumpled to her knees, letting out the cries I could never forget. My body went numb, my breath stopping for a moment as I stared at the spilled, decaying organs and mushy skin she desperately tried to hold in her trembling hands. I slowly looked up at her, pure horror on my face. "Olivia, what is this?" "He didn't belong down there. He belongs with me. With us."